How are you going to make use of that or have the benefit of being part of this great tradition if at the end of the day you don't ensure that you have the judges who are capable of themselves annexing this, holding fast to it, and making sure that it works for them as it does in other countries? You go to little islands, countries like New Zealand, proud tradition. You read their law reports. Marvelous. Singapore even. They are no longer even appeal finally to the Privy Council. These have all grown up and matured. We can't seem to find our way. We can't seem to find our way, and because that is so, as making the case about us not having sufficient judges or judges in sufficient numbers, and that takes a drain on those who are there. Apart from the fact that they get irritable more easy. They don't have reading time. They don't have time to even develop themselves. It's a machine, and they're on to the next case. So that when the end of the year comes and they have to give reports, they will give you all of the statistics about how many cases came before them and how many they determined. Doesn't matter whether they made bad law in the process.
Mr. Glinton, do you dealt with the aspect of the independence of the judiciary from the financial standpoint, where the advocates are saying that it's not paid enough? Is there any, do you know of any, where the judiciary is independent in that there's a commission separate from the government that they're responsible to, that pays them? And second to that, further to that, is there
separate budget?
Yeah, that's I know what you're saying, but are you aware of anywhere that happens?
Oh yeah.
And then
in most of the countries you to speak about, even if it means, like the United States, that periodically you will have a member of the Supreme Court of the United States. Sometimes it's the Chief Justice, sometimes it's another judge. Later they've been using Justice Kennedy to go and speak to a select group of the Senate to say, listen, we have a problem, not just in terms of the Supreme Court, but the whole federal bench, because they look after each other. And our ability to recruit fine people coming out of the law schools will very much be dependent on how attractive these things can be. I mean, we've had Chief Justice Roberts make the case for the American Supreme Court and the judges in the federal system. And you have to be able to do that. That is your accountability. You are saying to them, we are not in the business of raising money. That cheapens us. What we expect for you to do is to have a vote about which there is no comment and no fight, and that budget is our budget, either for a year or 3 years, and you look at it. Once you've cut that check, that's for us. We look after that. The point that this gentleman was making is something a little different from the one that you're making. His is one which is interesting, but yet I find that almost to a judge, they would rather not have the responsibility of being in charge of the budget. I do not know why, and maybe because they like being civil servants. They do not want to have it. Justice doesn't favor it. And yet, that in fact is the key. When you hire and fire, they treat, for example, even the registries here, as if these are just other departments to be subject to the Department of Public Personnel. They move people and shift them about as if it's nothing.
Sorry, Mr. Glenn, notwithstanding the OECD and the U.S. government attack on our second pillar, on the second pillar of our economy, what confidence can they have coming into a system like ours, that we depend on them for our middle class and upper middle class employees? What kind of confidence can they have in our system if we can't have?
Who are you talking about?
The banking, offshore banking sector.
Well, none at all. If you saw the business section of the Tribune today, and you see the Higgs and Johnson just around the corner here,
Right.
the calendars, and For a moment, I was inclined to celebrate. You know why? You remember, Mrs. Thompson, when Leandra and I were out there pointing out to them that this is your lifeblood. You fight for it. These were the same ones who were there recommending to the OECD which blade was sharp enough so that it did not make too much of a mess when they slit their throats. And they did not understand what was at stake. They could not even make a case for this country not at all being a place where money was being washed. Before any money comes to this country, it's already been laundered. You try to send a wire from here to Freeport. You know, if it's US dollars, you know where we must go? Through New York. Through New York. We could not make a case based on the fact that Bahamian dollars are not a trading currency. We could not even explain or ask them, why is it that it's easier for Bahamian to go just across to Fort Lauderdale or Miami and open up an account with less of a hassle, and they can here. And then you see the John Delaney's, and I'm calling names, these are my colleagues, and Brian and the rest of them. And they could not at the time understand why Leandra and I were being so quixotic, going at that windmill. Miss Thompson understands. She understood what we went to. Because Leandra and I had no business in financial services, and yet it was clear to us, and it was where we were vindicated. At about the same time, you had a similar movement in Canada, where the bar had to stand up and say, we will not subject ourselves to this. But for us, we can't afford it. We're not as big as Canada. We don't export. We don't mine. We don't do any of these things. And they sat back. You saw the insurance industry, financial services, only because someone who mistook his responsibility as the chief negotiator for this country by running to Europe and Washington with two flags, white flags, surrendering without even a fight, as a matter of principle. And you were to say to them, but how is it that we suddenly became so disgustingly illegal? Yeah, we've had a problem with drugs and all, but guess what? We're just transit. You know, we don't grow in here. Everybody uses us. We've never been able to make a case. We allowed people to convince us that somehow we were doing something that we had not been doing perhaps as long as anybody else in the world. And it was the thing that defined us. Nothing illicit. We don't own any banks in the Bahamas. These are all branchless. Banks in other countries. This is branch banking. You could call it, Bank of Nova Scotia Bahamas Limited. It's a Canadian bank. Bahamas branch. This is part of the problem. And in that scenario, it's easy for judges to come creeping across the border, go up to their benches, take their office, work silently, 3 and 4 years later to go out with their nice gratuity, and they leave. That is the country in which they live. They understand how it works. And so, sadly, you hear, well, these large law firms now having to lay off people, and they don't seem to understand. This is just the beginning. It's just the beginning. We don't have the answers. We've always been parasitic. And I feel sad about it. Because you're going to see some of the other ill effects of all of this. And we are going to feel it because for so many years we've lived so well in this place. In fact, that's why we've been able to live really so far apart from each other, you know, Mr. Lowe. We've all managed to live very well. Very well.
Success is about advancement.
That's right.
Mr. Glinton, I also write the Tribune, especially the letters to